All right, good afternoon, everybody, or morning or evening, depending upon where in the world you are located. But thank you for taking some time to join us on this really exciting webinar called Optimizing the Live Stream. We've got a fantastic panel lined up for you with some great technologists and business people from a variety of companies across the video ecosystem who have some really great experience in, in optimizing the live stream experience for viewers. So what I want to start out with first is just some housekeeping, a little brief introduction about the SVA, which is the Streaming Video Alliance, in case you're unaware of that. And then we'll go through each of the introductions, brief introductions from our panelists so you understand the company they work for and sort of what they do. And then we'll hop into the panel questions that we have set up for our discussion. So just some housekeeping, this is being recorded. We will distribute the recorded version via Twitter and LinkedIn and the Streaming Video Alliance website probably a little bit later today, so you can pass it along to colleagues who are unable to attend. Now, a little bit about the Streaming Video Alliance, in case you're unaware of the organization. We're really sort of a global consortium of companies from across the video ecosystem that have come together to collaborate on challenges associated with improving the streaming experience. So everything that's related to online video, whether it's privacy or networking or scaling or security, we're tackling those questions and those challenges and producing publications that organizations can adopt and really drive the improved experience of online video. All right, with that said, I am Jason Thibeault. I'm the Executive Director of the Streaming Video Alliance and your moderator for today. So why don't we start off with some introductions, and we'll begin with Chris Knowlton from BlueFrame Technology.
Hey, thanks, JT. Yeah, my name is Chris. I've been in the industry for nearly 20 years now, focusing on streaming as we've evolved it. I work for a company called BlueFrame that offers an end-to-end streaming service for primarily colleges, college sports. So a production software that does switching and graphics and instant replay and social media clipping and sharing, a cloud service that will take your video and transcode it into multiple bit rates and deliver it over CDN, and also player technology for HTML5 browsers, mobile and OTT. So full end-to-end solution with a monetization layer based on advertising and pay-per-view and subscription on top of that. That makes it really easy for someone who is not a streaming expert to jump right in and get started with an end-to-end solution.
Fantastic. And let's go move on to James Kirby from Edgware.
Okay, thanks, Jason. I'm James Kirby. I'm the Senior Director of Solutions Architecture for Edgware. So we are a hardware and software technology vendor, primarily focused on origin, repackaging, and TV CDNs. So we make the differentiation from our standpoint that our CDN technology is focused around TV and video services. So we're not a all-purpose CDN. We are very focused purely in the video space. And as Chris alluded to, I've also been in the industry for around about 15, 20 years, so I feel like a veteran.
Yes, you are. Let's move on to Matt Stock from Limelight Networks.
Thanks, JT. I'm the Principal Advanced Services Architect in the Limelight Advanced Services team. Limelight's a global CDN that's focused on three key areas: large object download, whole site delivery, and most important for this webinar, video streaming. We've got a private fiber backbone that provides the capacity and coverage to deliver, high quality experience for our customers. And for the past 5 years, I've assisted our top customers to plan and execute a lot of high profile live streaming events, including the Super Bowl and other live sports events. I've also authored a lot of white papers that ensure that the best practices that we've developed for live streaming are shared across all of our streaming customers.
Fantastic, Matt. Let's move on to Chris Wagner from Neulion.
Thanks, JT. Chris Wagner here. I'm one of four that started Neulion back in 2004. focused on live streaming events. We did about 63,000 live events last year that include all the NBA games with NBA League Pass, all the NFL games with Game Pass. We do the same thing for UFC, Univision, Big Ten Network, just to name a few of the brands that use our platform as a service to deliver a direct-to-consumer live event.
Fantastic, Chris. And then finally, Alec Henry from Viacom.
Hi there. Yes, Alec Henry from Viacom. I'm based out of our London office, but I'm the Senior Director for our Technology Convergence team. And I've been also doing streaming for probably around 20 years, 17 of which I've been at Viacom. And I now look after all our global live event streaming, as well as social to TV, looking after events such as the MTV EMAs, VMAs, Kids' Choice Awards, and lots of services to our own websites and mobile applications, as well as streaming to lots of third-party sites like Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, etc.
Fantastic. I mean, you guys are a great panel for this topic of, optimizing the live stream. So why don't we just jump into the questions? The first one I have is really kind of a high-level question, something to get everybody thinking about live streaming and how it's different from, on demand and the unique challenges associated with that. So, we'll start off with asking this of Matt Stock from Limelight. What are some of the fundamental challenges associated with providing a great live stream experience?
It's a really interesting question. It's a one that I've thought a lot about, and I actually think that the deepest fundamental challenge is really communication. Communication with the partners, making sure you've got the right partners to understand what a great streaming experience means for your particular events, and that you've got the partners that have experience that can share the best practices that they have to make sure that you kind of gain the benefit of those, that experience. So, for example, some folks are very concerned about the latency between, say, live TV and when it's visible on the stream. So knowing that, there are different techniques that you can use to reduce that delay so that, the person who's watching the TV doesn't have a different, isn't sharing the news with their streaming friends before it actually gets on the stream. Beyond communication, there's a few other challenges. Scale is obviously a big one. The diversity of devices that are used by viewers, last mile connectivity quality, CDN delivery architecture, to name a few.
Fantastic. Any other thoughts from the other panelists on that question? What are some of these challenges that everyone really across the video ecosystem faces?
This is Chris Wagner. I would add to that list, you've got the thundering herd effect, which for live events, certainly pay-per-view events, you've got this notion that everybody shows up at the same time, authenticates or pays at the same time, enters the service at the same time. So you have to be able to handle concurrency, but you also have to be able to handle kind of the workflow of taking an order, setting up an account, entitling the service based on what was purchased, and then creating a good video stream from there.
Yeah, I think this is James. I think both Matt and Chris touched on the majority of those. I could certainly see my bullet points disappearing as they spoke, but I think one of the other things that we haven't touched on yet is when we are in streaming a live event, if there is any form of personalization or ad insertion that is going on, then obviously all that needs to be handled glitch-free as well. And obviously I think the scalability of that and being able to offer a highly personalized service at great scale, which hopefully we would all want to have a great scale of service, I think is extremely important, especially as people now want or become more used to having personalized services.
Yep. And this is Alec from Viacom. I would say the other side we have as a content producer and a production company, is often actually the source of the content and the origination of the stream as well. So things like when we're at the MTV EMAs, that moves around venues every year all over Europe. It's often a challenge making sure we have good internet connections and robust delivery to CDN partners. That's often been a key challenge of signal acquisition and getting to the CDN before we get it to the last mile. So I think that's quite an important thing that I have to consider when we go to do a live stream event.
Yeah, you just ticked off another one of my bullets, Alec. This is the other thing that I see from the other end, because I deal with a lot of customers now that are just getting started in streaming. So while some of the topics some of you have brought up are fairly advanced and for larger events, sometimes it's somebody just getting started with maybe just a few thousand people watching, and they just need to think about some basics as well, right? I mean, you talked earlier, Matt, I think about sort of communications and establishing requirements, and those might be, what production level do you want? Do you want a fixed, if it's a football game, do you want a single camera mounted somewhere? Do you want multiple cameras and switching and graphics? To your point, Alec, do you have enough bandwidth out of your venue? Do you have good, so you can get signal acquisition to perhaps a cloud server and do your transcoding and CDN delivery from there? What is your end user experience like? Have you thought through how everyone's going to be able to view that content on the device that they want to watch, as opposed to just limited set of devices or desktops, or heaven forbid, specific browsers? And from a cost perspective, is this a one-off and do you have a fixed budget, or is this going to be a recurring thing where you need it to be sustainable, potentially monetized, so that you can continue to provide it as a service or as an offering down the road?
Fantastic. And actually, you guys ticked off one of my bullets. My next question was really asking about some of the scale considerations, and maybe we can dive into that a little bit more. If you don't mind, Alec, I can pick on you, I can pick on Chris, I could pick on Matt, I could pick on any of you guys for this question. But really, let's dive into scale, because you guys all mentioned it. It seems to be a critical challenge or consideration for live streaming. What are some of the things that providers, like Viacom, need to keep in mind when delivering live streams?
Yeah, thanks. It can be a real challenge, and I think we touched on it briefly during the last answers there around, it's not just the stream that we have to scale. It's all those ancillary services as well, like how, for instance, if our viewers are watching our live event through our MTV Playplex app, then they're going to be, hitting endpoints for data feeds to serve the content to them. We're doing, geo restriction lookups to make sure that they're able to access the content. So all those services we need to make sure can scale correctly as well, and that we have, alerted all our different teams to the fact that we're doing a live event, and all these different services need to be ready to go or ready to spin up additional configurations if we have to. We certainly spend a lot of time for our key events making sure that we have a full test plan in place and have gone through and tested that, can we throw load at these services, and is it all going to keep running? We have additionally now a lot of TVE authentication processes in place, so it's maybe not just our own services that we need to ensure are ready to scale, but it's the third-party authentication services that are also keyed up and ready. And those are some of the key things that when we now test our own infrastructure, it's actually sometimes making sure everyone else is going to be fully aware that we're ready to do a live event.
Yeah, this is Matt. Those are really good points, and often, when I've seen tests, and granted, from a CDN perspective, the payment systems and those kinds of pieces aren't the core of what we're focusing on. But we've also seen that a lack of testing there can really impact the quality of experience. On the video stream itself, I would just say that the two scaling elements, because live streaming is essentially synchronous, everybody wants that latest segment. That puts a lot of pressure on your origin encoders if your CDN or your delivery provider hasn't really designed it to deal with that kind of volume. So making sure that your CDN can absorb the expected demand on the edge, but also diffuse that load so that it doesn't, those synchronous transactions don't hit the origin and potentially cause real performance problems is a critical aspect.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with that, Matt. I think that's something that we see. I think Chris called it the thundering herd, and I think we definitely see that kind of steep ramp of subscribers using overspeed to fill their client buffers as they join the live stream. And I mean, that was certainly the case with the Mayweather-McGregor boxing match late last year. And that's something that we've been we've had in our technology from an Edgware standpoint for several years, both from a traditional IPTV world, but also we see obviously in the HTTP space, talking about request consolidation and making sure that we're spreading the load across multiple nodes closer to the subscribers at the edge of the network, rather than allowing all those initial cache miss, all that initial cache miss traffic to hit the origin and, as you say, cause significant problems at the back end.
Oh, fantastic. That's something that you just mentioned, James, that I want to expand on a little bit is the edge of the network, right? I know that over the past, maybe say 2, 3, 4 years, this has become an increasingly important part of delivering live streams. And I'm just wondering if you have some thoughts on, the role of edge computing and what that will play in delivering the live stream experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, I think certainly from an Edgware perspective, we've always been about getting as close to the subscriber as we can. Maybe not as far as the CPE device. Obviously, that opens up a whole other can of worms, but certainly getting as close to the edge of the network to those subscribers. And we can do that either from our own proprietary appliances, which are hardware accelerated for video delivery, but also from a pure software standpoint, which enables us to use generic IT, standard computing hardware, as well as virtualized and potentially public or private cloud environments as well. So I think it has a very key role to play in live streaming, certainly as we deliver large events, large scale events, where you have tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands or even millions of concurrent subscribers, where you can't scale an origin to deliver that direct to consumer without some form of deep distribution at the edge of the network towards those end subscribers.
Hey, JT, it's Chris. One thing I'd add to the conversation, we did about 315 live petabytes over the last 12 months of live petabyte streams. So it's good volume there. When you look at the NBA and you have those viewers in about 180 different countries as they attach and look at these live games, the live channel itself, one of the other things we've put in place is the ability to switch CDNs based on performance. So looking at different geos, looking at our different CDN partners and moving traffic around in order to create the best experience possible for the viewer. We're not only doing HD streaming, on smartphones, but we're also doing 4K live streaming. So when you do a live 4K UFC event, 60 frames at an average of 18 to 20 megabits of connection, you need to be able to really look end to end at the ability to deliver, those size streams to get the kind of picture quality that the viewer would want. And then the other thing that we haven't brought up yet that adds another point of complexity to the live event itself is the new demands for security and being able to really have a multi-DRM implementation to work with all the different browsers that are out there. Since sports rights in particular are so expensive, the need for control of piracy and content protection is really born, kind of new live multi-DRM requirements, which really haven't been around for more than a year. They have been with the studios for VOD, but when you start talking about, streaming live sports events, handling a broad device coverage and being able to secure those streams, it adds more complexity.
What I would add to the edge computing point is really, I think it can mean a couple of different things. Connectivity to last mile providers obviously is kind of bread and butter for a CDN like Limelight. We've got lots of connectivity that's very deeply entrenched, so that the access is kind of a standard piece of what we offer. But edge computing, in my mind, means more than just the caching aspect. It's actually being able to do what amounts to custom business logic on all of these edge nodes that let our customers, solve particular problems. And so for me, it really opens up some really interesting, more complex workflows, some of which we touched on earlier that are challenges. For example, you can add watermarking workflows so that you can identify sources of restreamed content more easily. You can build in smarter distributed authorization and ad insertion workflows potentially. The key is that tasks that you've historically put on the content provider infrastructure, you can leverage the CDN a little bit more in the past. So that's the exciting thing to me.
Yeah, I would wholeheartedly endorse that. Obviously, coming from Edgware, obviously that's kind of our bread and butter, and being able to do things like watermarking, repackaging, personalized ad insertion at the edge of the network is very important for us, and we're focusing a lot of efforts on that as well. Things like bitstream watermarking as opposed to AB is something where you can actually get down to a granularity where you can identify the individual subscriber within that watermark rather than just having an A/B solution for that. And that's something we can do within our software solutions.
One of the other things too that I think was touched on earlier in answering a different question was just the question of latency as well, right? Edge computing moves some of that processing, that business logic out to the edge, so that the latency, the time that it requires to make a request, perhaps it is, whether it's personalized packaging or ad insertion, it moves that operation closer to the end user and potentially reduces the amount of time it takes for that response to get to them. And that allows us to going back to the earlier topic of, the latency between when you see something on your TV and when you see it on the stream, it potentially reduces that and helps get that closer in sync as well. So you have more of a unified experience across end platforms. And as an end user, not having to wait for several seconds, let's say, for something to happen, but have that be very snappy and very responsive, just really improves the user experience overall. And I think edge computing is really going to help us with that as well.
Fantastic. So let's take a wider look at something. So obviously we just looked deep into the network, and we'll return to the network in a little bit. But I kind of want to take a panoramic look at the viewing experience itself. Obviously, people are watching lots of content on lots of different devices, right? You've got connected devices like Apple TVs and Rokus and Fire Sticks and all that stuff. You've got mobile devices like smartphones and tablets. You've got PCs and laptops. There's just a plethora of devices. But really what it seems to be happening, and if we all believe the Cisco numbers, that by, I think, 2020 or 2021, 80% of mobile traffic is going to be video. How does mobile viewing complicate a provider's ability to deliver a great live streaming experience? And let's start with Chris on this one. Chris Knowlton, sorry.
Sure. Yeah. So it can be a challenge for a lot of folks because depending on the type of experience you're trying to deliver and to whom you're delivering it and what you expect their mobile device to be, you could have a bunch of challenges because you have to deal with device age. Is the device new enough that it's going to run H.264 and HLS or Dash, modern codecs that are pretty ubiquitous now, but some older devices don't do that well. And so if you're dealing with an audience that might have older devices or aspect ratios that are not sort of standard 16:9, how do you want to deal with that? Do you want to encode all of your content differently? Do you want to provide for them a custom manifest for the HLS streams based on the device that they're watching from? And in which case you might, again, want to have business logic that provides for that, either back at the origin or using edge computing. You may also need to have different set of renditions available, again, based on codecs available on the device. I think probably even a bigger issue is around your bandwidth conditions. Your mobile users often are on Wi-Fi, but sometimes they're on a cell connection, and maybe they're in a car that's going down the road, and now you have to be able to deal in near real time with bandwidth fluctuations and be able to provide for them a good experience so that it doesn't suddenly start buffering, even if they're using adaptive bitrate streaming, just because you happen to have encoded everything with 10-second chunks, and in that 10 seconds they've gone out of range, and they're they don't come back in range into a good bandwidth fast enough for the successive chunks to actually play correctly. And then I think the last thing that comes to my mind when it comes to mobile devices is just battery life. Depending on what kind of decoding you're asking that end user device to do, if it's 4K content, it's probably going to take more processing power, especially on older devices, to decode the content and watch it. And just providing a lower resolution stream may seem sort of illogical in a way when you're thinking about providing a better user experience, but sometimes doing that means lower processing power is required. Maybe you're just using a simpler codec, baseline H.264 instead of high, things like that allow you to give your customers actually a better experience on those older devices, because now their battery doesn't run out halfway through the event that you're trying to stream to them.
Yeah, I guess those are excellent points and very similar to what I was going to mention. The one kind of anecdote related to battery life that we've run into is some mobile devices, their network hardware bursts packets to the network to save battery. So they batch up transactions and then they send them all at once. And we've actually found that in some cases that translates into degraded performance because the latency isn't uniform, right? So sometimes the packets come fast and sometimes it comes slow, and that can be challenging when you're trying to make sure that they're getting a consistent experience. So there's a lot of subtleties, particularly when you're talking about a cellular network, but just these battery devices, you can be constantly surprised by how they behave.
Yeah, I would add to JT, to your point, when you look at video starts, the majority of video starts for most of the OTT services are actually on mobile. So creating immersive viewing experiences on small displays is a challenge. One of the things I see happening this year is the ability to do graphic extensions as overlays on those small displays. If it's sports, it could be a graphic extension around stats. It could be a sponsor or an ad unit. The ability to create immersive experiences on the small screens, I think, is really key. Since you do have so much usage on mobile to try to drive longer engagement times, but if you have a pay-for service to attract and retain subscribers when a lot of the video start traffic's on these small displays.
Yeah, I guess we've got same challenges there around, you sort of mentioning graphics and overlays. We'll often want to do that on our websites, and the producers and production teams are all excited when we offer sort of multi-view type experiences, and you can jump between different backstage cameras of a live event, things like that. That's often quite a challenge to try and reduce down onto a UI on a smaller device. I guess where we've sort of providing a different sort of experience on a mobile, then we're often providing tools like VR So we're providing, 360-degree type streams from the side of the stage, and deliver that as a stream to mobile as almost an alternative type experience. So we have a whole bunch of different challenges to deliver VR quality content at high enough resolution to mobile devices. And it's often those sort of challenges of what's the new cool thing that excites our audience, gets them interested, as well as our production teams and sponsors, of course. And now one of the big things we often find with the production teams is they often want to now switch to a 9:16 ratio, because our audience are quite used to seeing the video in that format in their hands. So it's also looking at changing everything around to support that kind of model.
All great answers. I mean, and that's definitely something that I see from a variety of Streaming Video Alliance members, is this focus on mobile and how to deal with it and how to optimize for it. But let's jump back into the network a little bit again. So obviously, when it comes to mobile viewing, for example, operators are really not set up for video, right? They never were. They're moving in that direction, but they have lots of challenges, and bandwidth is a huge problem. What is the impact of network congestion, on things like latency of live stream delivery? How can new technologies like Multicast ABR, LTEV, and things like that help alleviate some of these problems? And I'm throwing that out to anybody. I'm not going to pick on somebody for this question. Maybe I should have picked on somebody.
All right, I'll bite. So a network congestion, I think, is generally, a challenge. From a CDN perspective, it really depends a great deal on the topology and connectivity. So, in a lot of ways, it comes back to what kind of connectivity, what kind of peering relationships exist with the ISPs in the region that you're interested in serving. So some of the how you approach this is going to depend on where your viewers are. If you're primarily concerned about the continental US, then you've got a variety of different choices. If you're looking for a global delivery and you still want that same level of service, you've got to look for providers that are going to help you with that. But in practice, at least from my experience, we've found that a lot of the challenges related to congestion are, in essence, bandwidth limits for individual subscribers, connectivity to a mobile network, things of that nature. So it's very deep within that last mile. And there's some techniques, including building cache infrastructure, and I'm sure others on the panel will talk about this, within the ISP networks, help eliminate at least some of these things. With regards to Multicast ABR, it's unclear to me how effective it'll be to address this specific class of congestion, only because it's very personalized. Multicast isn't necessarily going to help you solve the fact that you're on a mobile link and you're far away from the transmitter, but there may be other cases where it's going to be more successful, particularly for links that are kind of in the middle haul that are periodically congested.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Sorry, go ahead. I was just going to say, I think it will require CDN and ISP support. You really have kind of three legs of the stool here. You have the origin, you have the CDN, and you have the ISP, and how all three work together, I think, is important. And I agree that as the ISP takes on more of the responsibility for multicast, I think it's good, but I don't think it's going to solve all the problems.
Yeah. I mean, I was going to say much the same. I think Multicast ABR is has potential, but I don't think it's the silver bullet that perhaps people think it might be. It's very good for, I guess, where you own the IP, the underlying IP network as well, and obviously the traffic being live. But it does involve at some point you've got to have multicast termination points in that network, and obviously if you try and get that close to the subscribers, is this something that you need to involve all CPE vendors that are involved, residential gateways, or at what point do you break out of that multicast flow into a unicast session anyway? And if we're talking, fiber to the home or people delivering gigabit per second to residential units, then is there any significant benefit for it being a multicast link versus unicast? I think obviously, the key thing is to reduce that network congestion is to build out a very intelligent caching layer as close to those subscribers as possible, without getting drawn into that kind of nightmare around potentially dealing with every CPE vendor out there.
I do think for the cable and IPTV providers, those who are providing that infrastructure to the home, multicast ABR may be really useful, especially as they are challenged with trying to increase bandwidths on older infrastructures to those homes. If they can convert some of that over to multicast ABR and use that home gateway as the multicast termination point, and then from there within the home unicast everything around, I think it does give them a way to extend potentially parts of the lifetime of parts of their infrastructure. And so for those folks, it may be useful. But I do agree for everybody else who, if they don't own that infrastructure, or if they're trying to get to a mobile device or something not in the home, then it's definitely going to be a challenge, and that's where caching comes in. We've seen a lot of the CDNs purchase, acquire, peer technology, peer-to-peer type technology to sort of extend the network further down into some of the ISPs, so that users who are on the same basic subnet, if you will, within an ISP can share content among themselves in order to not have a congestion point coming into the ISP. I do think some of those other technologies are part of the solution. Multicast ABR will be a solution for a smaller set of potential deployers, but for everyone else, the better caching, better, in some cases, peer-to-peer, just better CDN technology, if you will, hybrid CDN, if you want to call it that, will probably carry most of the traffic, I would think.
Fantastic. That's a great discussion around that topic. I mean, I think it's a lot of people are looking at things like multicast ABR as the silver bullet, and perhaps it's not, but definitely is. There's a roadmap of improving network congestion and throughput that a lot of these operators are moving down. This is a question for Chris Wagner, and obviously everyone else can jump in afterwards. But obviously Neulion is an end-to-end provider, so they're doing lots of pieces in delivering content from the provider through to the end user. So obviously, Chris, you have a lot of experience around workflow. Are there ways in which the operational workflow can be improved to provide a better live streaming experience? What are some things that people can do operationally?
Well, to your point, JT, we're a service company, right? So we operate the service on behalf of a rights holder, and video quality is kind of the basis for everything else. The video has to look great, or people don't watch a lot of it or pay for it, and it impacts ad delivery, and I mean everything kind of starts with the quality of the video. So we do spend a lot of time on encoding tunings and tuning encoding profiles. We own I think one of the largest libraries of codecs. We bought a company called Main Concept. And our codec library is incredibly extensive. So we use those codec profiles to tailor how to deliver video across unmanaged networks, right? Because that's OTT. And in those profiles and the way that you constantly look, constantly watch. I mean, we have a network operations center in 5 different places in the world that physical people staff those NOCs, and part of their responsibility is really looking at how our video workflows are performing across these unmanaged networks. And it's that experience of how you tune those profiles and balance them between peak bandwidth, balance them between quality. How do you do fast startups, right? Because that's the other part of this. It's not just the quality of the stream, but how do you really start that video quickly and then take advantage, was talked about earlier, this to have a consistent experience as viewers move between Wi-Fi and cell. So yeah, we spent a lot of time doing that tuning. It's just an experience level, and it's constantly watching it. So if you're doing linear channels or live events, especially long events, World Surf League is a 4-hour event. Linear channels are 7x24. So that tuning and the review of all the different components end to end is key.
Anybody else want to jump in for that?
Yeah, I'll add a couple of my thoughts. I think that in general, simpler is better. Now, what is simple but not too simple can still be pretty complex when you're talking about these kinds of live events. But to the extent you can reduce complexity, it's important. So, how do you do that? I think one of the other panelists mentioned earlier in the hour. Running tests before the event. So it consistently surprises me how often people are prepared to go into a high stakes live event without doing end-to-end testing of the configurations and things like that. So it's very critical to go through and at least functionality test all of the components, whether that's authorization workflows, the CDN delivery, the players, all of those elements, because that's going to flush out a lot of silly things that are going to throw you off. Once you've done those tests, having some sort of a change freeze process coordinated across your different providers so that there aren't unintended changes is important. I remember there was one situation which required some creative, quick, on the fly, 20 minutes before the event went live changes, because one of the providers accidentally made a change, and it could have really crippled the delivery process. So in addition to changing, having contingency plans and redundancy for key components, so multi-CDN strategy, how you're going to handle a situation if your authorization server overloads. So in that situation, do you have a pass-through where for a period of time you're going to allow people to access without going through the pay barrier, so that they continue to get the experience and you don't get the negative press of, hey, I bought it and it didn't, I couldn't get in, those kinds of things. Backup encoders. Do you have a mechanism to strip top bit rates? All of these kind of contingency plans that you can have. And then, as I mentioned earlier in the session, strong lines of communication with your partners so that if things happen, you can address them as promptly as possible during the event. So live event bridge, whatever mechanisms make sense, but so that everybody knows who the contacts are and how to react when a surprise happens.
Yeah, definitely agree on a lot of those points, and certainly those are many that we use for a lot of the Viacom live events. That conference bridge, normally bridging multiple time zones with people from our different offices and locations, also doing their own local checks on those streams as well during the live event in order to feed back. While we have all the live measurement tools going on, it's often great to have actual real feedback from people using different network providers and different devices to check everything is performing as expected. One of the big things, as I mentioned earlier, around when we moved from venue to venue, has been sometimes that internet connectivity. We've been trialing recently Akamai's Media Services Live product, which does UDP acceleration to the CDN, and that's we found that to be really good for ensuring that, you know, if there is any issues or local packet loss at any point on that local network, that just gives us that extra bit of push to make sure our content goes through. And I guess the other area on that is around sometimes we're using tools like mobile bonded delivery with like live view encoders. If we have people actually out and about, they're not on a fixed network. And that's proved really successful for events. So recently we used one at Trafalgar Square for a big concert with U2 and David Guetta. And that was, you know, using, it's very difficult there because you're in a big event where there's, you know, 10,000 people in the square and you can't use mobile connectivity, but we're able to get, you know, a local Wi-Fi plus wired connection into a live view unit to sort of mobile and bonded network aggregation to ensure that you've got a really good quality of network connection. And it's been also those advances as well that have led us have production teams sort of go into places we wouldn't normally have expected them to be. So we've gone live streaming from, you know, the London Eye and other live events as we can quite quickly as possible. And I think that's rapidly changing that sort of improvement to the production process and the operational workflow. So more tools like that were very welcome.
And let me add a couple of basics. You guys have done a great job of checking off a whole bunch of things that I had on my list. But what surprised me, we're over 100,000 broadcasts in now. And I'm surprised that some of our broadcasters, they've been around a long time, and many of them have not, because they're focused on sports and you know, being athletic directors and sports information directors. They are focusing on the sports and not so much on the streaming technology. And so we continue to struggle having conversations with folks who've been streaming for a while, a simple RTMP stream, to go out and do something as basic as adaptive bitrate streaming. So while a lot of the solutions we've talked about are really fairly sophisticated and leading edge, we have a lot of customers who've been doing it for a while and don't realize that leading edge has moved on. And so we have to go and explain how Netflix and Hulu and YouTube are all using ABR, and that's why they're having a better experience at home than some of their viewers are having watching their streams if they use RTMP and single bitrate. So it's something as simple as saying, do adaptive bitrate streaming, do not try and send multiple bitrates out of your venue and coding them all there, but send a single HD bitrate up to the cloud, do your transcoding there. To the point that was just made, if you don't have good bandwidth even to do a 720 or 1080p stream out of your venue, then do something like bonded cellular to make sure you have sufficient bandwidth out of there. Whether it's a remote location because you're on a bunch of baseball diamonds somewhere, or it's an older facility, make sure that you can get that HD signal out to the cloud, and from there you can do all sorts of great things with it to deliver a better user experience. And that, I'll go back to the end-to-end testing. That's been key. It's so key, in fact, that we built it into our workflow where somebody can now, a producer can just hit a test button, do a complete end-to-end test before it actually goes live, and then hit the live button when they're ready, and they've confirmed that all the pieces are working correctly. So I have to agree. Just some of the basics are things that some folks who have either been doing it a while or just getting started need reminding of as well. And then all of the other things that were talked about before me, I think, are critical as you get more sophisticated and go for a larger audience, and one where you have high visibility and do not fail mentalities.
Great. Oh, looks like we have about 10 minutes left, and we've got a couple of audience questions that I want to make sure we get to. So let me ask these questions, and if we have a little bit more time, I've got another question to ask to wrap it up. But the first one we have is, the question is there anything being done to address the following scenario? So two people are sitting next to each other, each watching the same live event, each on an excellent network, but one person is slightly behind the other. Obviously, this can be very frustrating for the person who is slightly behind. Does anyone want to address that question? You know, what's being done to sort of fix that experience? I know you're all thinking of your answers.
Well, at a high level, I mean, there are products out there now which will offer you the ability to synchronize devices, synchronize across a network using a network clock, essentially, and get almost synchronous playback. So you have sort of that, you can call it a house party mode or multi-device synchronization mode, whatever you want to call it, that idea that two people sitting next to each other are having an almost synchronized experience. I don't know all the details of those, and I know of one solution in particular, but maybe some of the other panelists can talk more about how they've seen that actually deployed in the field.
Yeah, I was going to talk a little bit about just data. I mean, you can certainly go back to a broadcast model, right? One to many, everybody gets to see the same thing. I mean, the benefit of a unicast and a live streaming is you can personalize the experiences. And you have those three legs again, right? The cloud origin, the CDN, and the ISP, even though in your example, they're both sitting on the same ISP. You do have that travel time. One thing that is becoming more valuable is the watch data that can be collected in real time that allows you to segment down to the individual viewer, the device type, what ISP are they on, what CDN am I traveling across, what type of content am I watching right now? And it's that watch data, I think, is helping continue to tune the video workflow across those three legs in order to eliminate your question. So there's still work to be done there, but I think there's technology that and you have the three pieces starting to play better together. But the watch data becomes a key element of feedback.
Yeah, I'd echo some of what Chris is saying, and also, that we've seen some, I'm going to call it early work, because I think that this is still an evolving area, but there's interest in it. There is definite interest in doing stream synchronization for a couple of different use cases. I mean, the one use case that you describe is in some ways perhaps less interesting than the one where we've seen customers that want to have multiple cameras, say multiple camera angles, multiple shots from a venue, and instead of them doing the composition of, say, picture-in-a-picture or multiple screens in the in boxes, if you will, and then sending that encoded to the client, they want the client to be able to compose multiple views and have all of those views synchronized. And so that's I think
that's a good point. And time code syncing, I don't know if it'd be done on when you say the other end, the consumer, but the time code syncing, because with the UFC we have multiple cameras, and you have to use time codes to sync the encodes off those different streams, so that you don't see one angle the guy hasn't been punched yet, and the other angle he just got hit in the face. But yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, definitely, it affects both ends. But to the viewer point, yeah, that idea of synchronizing on the client side with time codes is what I was thinking of. The idea that whichever laptop you're on, if you're syncing through a common network clock on that experience somewhere, then your player should have a pretty good sense within a few milliseconds of where you are in viewing that content and be able to synchronize it across multiple devices. And I think that's probably what folks like NetInsight and some of these other solutions out there are using to synchronize across devices.
Yeah, I think it's also important as well, if everything leaving the same end caching node, if you like, or edge cache node, should be synchronous. So obviously you also have to make sure that the cache is not holding stale segments and stale manifests, and that everything in there is as up to date and as fresh as possible.
Great. All right, I've got one other question, a totally different topic. But the question came in, what are your thoughts around AV1? Do you think that it will kill HEVC in long term? Any experiences so far? It's a doozy.
Yeah, right.
I mean, from a Neulion standpoint, we don't have any experiences there, nor do we have any rights holders dictating that format. I mean, we've been doing HEVC for the 4K live streams, but the bulk of the videos, all the guys will attest to, is all HLS. We like HEVC for the 4K live events just to deal with peak concurrency, but those are, the two primary formats for us anyway.
And I've seen a lot of customers that have been using HEVC going down that path, especially for their 4K content and potentially mixing that with H.264 and the lower bit rates. I think what's most interesting to me right now is just the fact that Apple sort of was moving in a direction that was leading the industry to HEVC, and suddenly saying that they would support this, and maybe they're just hedging their bets. But I think the fact that they openly said we're going to support this really made a lot of people stop and think and wonder if maybe they should just hold off a little bit before they go to an all HEVC plan. That's the impression I have in talking with some folks, that plans that they were going to put in place now are on hold while they wait and see what further developments come out.
Yeah. Anybody else? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the answer to the question, you could just say yes, and it can be as ambiguous as possible. I think from our standpoint, we're certainly seeing. We're seeing people beginning to talk about AV1, but all around the royalties and license fees and things like that. But HEVC, you could argue, has been around a little bit longer, so there's a lot more traction for it. But we're not seeing, most of our customers, I would say, HLS, they're looking at Dash, they like HEVC. They may be looking into AV1, but it's still very early days at this point.
Yeah, agreed.
All right, we've got about 3 minutes left, and that's all the attendee questions that we have. So I'm curious if anybody's got any final thoughts on live streaming for our audience. Maybe doing a little prognosticating, right? What are some of the live streaming challenges that we're going to have to tackle in the coming years? Is there any way to even predict them? Is it, to Chris Wagner's point, all about the thundering herd? I'd love to hear sort of your end thoughts on that in general.
AV1.
I
think from my standpoint, I think it was touched on a bit by Chris Wagner earlier. We talked about MultiDRM. We've also touched on the increase in the need to do things like watermarking as close to the subscriber as possible. I think the more live events we have, and the bigger and better live events these are, whether it's NBA or Premier League soccer over here, or season 8 of Game of Thrones, whatever it might be. I think it is going to be things like multi-DRM and piracy that's going to be driving a lot of innovation.
JT, I would say scale. Scale is, I think our largest concurrent event was 1.6 million concurrent viewers. So as more and more content becomes available online and larger audiences show up to watch that content, being able to scale to the types of numbers that the legacy broadcast world has solved over the last, 50 years, will be where we need to go as an industry, which includes, again, not just the content rights holders, but the CDNs and the ISPs all working together to kind of meet those kind of scale requirements.
I'd add that in addition to those points, because I completely agree, the other pressure that we're seeing is more and more interest in eliminating that built-in delay for segmenting and the latency between the action happening on the field and what's being streamed. So protocols like WebRTC, we've done some work where we've deployed streams globally with sub-second latency, and so there's some really interesting work that's going on there, and I think that there's going to be more and more demand for, not for every customer, but certainly for live sports and other sorts of areas like that, there's a great deal of interest in kind of closing that latency gap.
Yeah, and I would agree. Chris hit it with scale, and I think Matt hit it with latency. Both of those are gonna be big issues that I think we're gonna be solving over the next few years. Hopefully, over the next few years, whether it's through WebSockets and WebRTC to get any screen delivery at super low latency, sub 1 second latency, and scalability, whether that's through multicast ABR across IPTV and cable networks, or much better caching efficiency and perhaps some edge computing smarts, for all the other devices, folks who are not getting content from their cable provider. It's going to be a whole collection of these different solutions that are going to give us those better interactive, low latency live streaming experiences at scale.
Fantastic. Well, that wraps it up for us. I want to say thank you very much to our panelists. You guys did a great job. It was a really interesting discussion. Lots of back and forth, good topics, and interesting insights that I know our audience can benefit from. And I want to say thank you to everyone who joined us on this webinar and taking time out of your day to listen to these great panelists. Again, we'll have this recorded. We'll have it put up probably sometime later today or tomorrow, and we'll send out an email to everyone who couldn't attend so that they can all go and look at the on-demand version. Again, thank you very much. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and we will talk to you soon.
Great stuff. Thank you very much.
Thank you.